All right, so briefly a little bit about me. I didn't realize I never actually introduced what all I've done and why I'm the coach for the team and everything. So I've done 19 seasons of FRC now. I started way back in 2003. So 2022 will be my 20th. I came to Houston to go to Rice University, and I mentored a team at Lamar High School for 4 years while I was at college, then a year after. Um, I've done some engineering consulting. I've done some robotics camp work and robotics instruction work at different places. Um, in addition to being the head coach for Spectrum, I also volunteer at a bunch of events. So I'm one of the lead robot inspectors for FRC at various events in Texas, and I've done it at other levels in other states and kind of around all over. Um, Plus refereeing for other events and robot inspecting for First Global, which is cool. I got to go to Mexico City and Dubai for that, so that's fun. So robots all over the place basically. Um, so I have a lot of experience in doing first robotics competition. Okay, so hopefully everyone has already done this part of it. So I sent it out. We talked about it last week, and I sent out some reminders. But basically, we need to make sure everyone has a student account and make sure it is the actual educational account, because that way we can all link together and have it when we get to the point where we all need to be on the same team and we can edit the same documents. All the accounts need to be educational for all of that to work. So hopefully everyone's already done that. So let's talk about what OnShape really is a little bit more. We touched on it last week and why we use it. So OnShape is a program to do computer-aided design. Computer-aided design started a long time ago. There have been people using computers to do engineering drawings and things for decades now. But they've gotten much, much more advanced and easier to use at the same time. So we can do a lot more with them now. And they're a lot simpler and easier to learn than they've ever been before. So it's a really nice time to be getting involved. The technology is very mature, and we've kind of changed how we've done some things even just in the last 5 years or so, especially with OnShape, the program we're going to learn. That has made it a lot easier to do computer-aided design for students and for anyone who's new to it. It's just gotten a lot more accessible. The main point is that this allows us for 3D modeling and 3D computer-aided design. We're able to make 3D models, so we can not only like lay things out in just like normal 2 dimensions on like the computer monitor. We can actually have it in 3D. We can rotate it. We can move around that space, see exactly how every part is going to mount and bolt together and everything while we're actually doing completely on the computer before we have to actually build it. So it saves us a lot of time. It saves us a lot of resources because we can test things and make sure everything's going to work virtually before we actually do it in the lab. Everything is fully dimensionally accurate. That's one of the most important things. We're not just drawing and shaping things like you would in something like Blender, which you can do a little bit of dimension stuff, but a lot of those are just made to like look really nice. This is designed to make sure that it's actually a functional part that you can make in real life, so that all the dimensions are the same, or all the dimensions are accurate and representative of what they would be if you actually create the part, robot, whatever we're actually designing. Okay, so the kind of basic steps for creating a 3D object in any of the CAD programs. So learning how to do it in OnShape will allow you to do it in any of the number of 3D modeling programs that exist. Before we moved to OnShape last year, we were using a program called SolidWorks. If you learn how to use OnShape really well, and if at some point maybe you go to university and they use SolidWorks for their programs, learning the other one doesn't take that much time. There's definitely some habits you have to get out of, but it's not that bad. Like it's not any different than it's probably a little bit more complicated than like switching web browsers or switch like anything like that. Where if you've used one program that does one thing and another to do another that are kind of the same, CAD similar, a lot of the buttons and things are all going to look about the same. The way all of the CAD programs work is you basically start by making a 2D sketch. So we're going to start by basically making, say, a rectangle. We're going to give it some dimensions. So in this case, everything's default to inches for us. So this is 3 inches wide by 2 inches tall. And so now this is just that 2D object. So all of our sketches are in 2D. And then to make them into 3D, we have to do what's called add a feature. And so in OnShape, it's called extrude. and we basically just add height to it. So extrude is just kind of like pulling that sketch and adding height and depth, or adding depth to the sketch that we have. So now we can actually make like a 3D object. And I'm going to go through and do it in OnShape too, but I want to get the concept across first before we actually look at it in OnShape. So after we have like a 3D object, so like this rectangular prism here, the next step is basically kind of repeating what we already did, except now we can put new sketches on any of the faces of the object that exists. So now that we have this rectangular prism, it has 6 faces, so we can start drawing sketches on any one of these faces and doing things to it. So we can say, like in this example, we're going to add more sketches. We're going to add this circle here. So it has a diameter of 1 inch right in the middle of this face. And then once we have that sketch, we can use it to do more features, such as add or remove material. So we can take material out, which is basically just extruding removal. So we can take that hole out of the middle of it. If we wanted to add, instead of like removing, we could add that cylinder coming out of it. Maybe we're making some sort of peg that's going to slot into something. It just kind of depends on what we're trying to make. But that's the basic function of CAD, is we're just going to make some sketches. We're going to take those sketches. We're going to use features to make them into 3D parts, because a 3D part is what we're actually able to create for the robot. So some bit of the robot or some bit of whatever we're making. It's not, we don't just make robots, but a lot of any of the projects we're doing or anything, we have to make it into 3D so that we could 3D print it, or we could make sure it's going to fit right when we go to laser cut it, any of that. And then once you have it in 3D, you can keep sketching and keep modifying that 3D part with more and more features. That's the main concept. It goes sketch, feature, and then sketch, feature, over and over again until you get the part that you actually want. Okay, so looking at OnShape, when you first sign in, you'll be brought to a window that kind of looks like this. You won't have all of these files here. I've used OnShape quite a bit, so I have folders and different parts that I've opened and things before. Yours will be pretty much blank. And to start a new document, we come up to OnShape. We have this nice create button, and we're just going to create a new document. So this is the same place if you have too many documents and you want to start organizing stuff, you would create a folder, and then you can move things in and out, and you can organize your area so you can kind of find documents. We can also import files. So if something was a 3D model that was made either in another program that you made, or a lot of times there's 3D models that you can just download from like the manufacturer. They'll give you the 3D model information so you can include it in your parts. There's also 3D models that other people have made. There's lots of websites where they just share 3D models. So if there's some kind of common part or item that you want to include in a model, a lot of times you can just go find it already. You can import it directly in OnShape. In this case, we're just going to make a document. So a document is the main sort of file for all of OnShape. So it has like an entire project can be done in a single document. You don't like you need every single part to have its own document, which is very convenient. It's one of the things that makes OnShape really powerful, is like the entire project can be done in one thing, and it all relates to itself, and it makes it so you have very accurate and easy to make parts. So we're just going to call this Intro to CAD Training, something like that. You can name it whatever you like for yours, because we just want to get to this blank document. Okay, so this is the document view inside of OnShape. I'm not going to go through every little detail about it, but we can kind of see some of the things that are around here. This main toolbar is what you'll mostly be interacting with. It kind of tells you what are the options for you to do in whatever context you're in right now. So right now we're kind of in the 3D context, even though we don't have an object right now. These are all the different features we could do. The first thing we will do is we're going to create a sketch, which is what the sketch button is for. But before we do that, there's a couple other things to figure out. So over here on the left is our feature tree. So as we're creating stuff, you'll start seeing them all get added over here coming down. So we can kind of see like the history of how everything was made for the part we're making. And we can go back and edit. OnShape has pretty infinite undos. So if you do something and you realize, oh, I wanted to do it a little bit different, you can undo it all the way through. We have version control, so it's keeping track of the every change in the document gets kept track of in this version and history page. So even if you do something and you completely want to change it back to what you had 2 or 3 days ago, that's totally doable. You can do that just with the versioning in here. So it's really nice that it keeps everything together. So kind of like what you are able to do with Google Docs, where you can have multiple people working on something. You can revert edits, you can change versions, you can leave comments. All of that same style of stuff happens in OnShape, and that's a really big help when we have a dozen people or so all kind of working on the same CAD designs and the same project. Being able to see who makes changes and leaving comments on those changes and things helps a lot for getting us to the output or the final outcome of a functional working robot. This bottom taskbar down here, this bottom toolbar is super important. This is where we have uh, the different parts of our document, and there's different like tabs inside the document. So we have what's called a part studio, and whenever you make a new document, you have a part studio 1 and you have an assembly 1. We're not going to get into assemblies tonight, but assemblies are when we start adding things together and like kind of making multiple parts come together and be connected in the way that they would be connected in real life. So when we're actually doing the entire robot, it'll all finish up in a full assembly with all of the various motors and parts and wheels, everything that goes into the robot all get assembled in the assembly, and we know how they're all going to be related and mounted to each other. And we'll do that in a future one of these sessions. But tonight we're going to focus mostly on the part studio, because this is how we can start from a blank space and start creating 3D models. Part studios are a little bit unique in terms of other CAD programs. So if you do flip back to some, or if you do switch to some other CAD program in the future, or if maybe you've had experience with like Tinkercad or 123 CAD, there's a bunch of other ones that people may have used previously, kind of some of the introduction ones. The documents here are able to have multiple parts, so that's why we have this little window down here. It tells you how many parts you actually have in your part studio. So we'll see that in a second when we're able to create more than just one thing in this universe, even though it's not an assembly. So we can like kind of individually create as many parts as we want in here and tie them all together and kind of leave them without having to do the assembly bit, as long as we're the ones creating the part. Okay, so let's make this all make a little bit more sense by actually doing it. So a couple things before we even get started. Your mouse buttons are very helpful. So trying to do OnShape without a mouse, or trying to do any CAD without a mouse, is very difficult, because we use the mouse to kind of navigate this universe. So we have our 3 default planes here. We have the top, front, and right, and we also have this point right in the middle, which is the origin. So this is kind of like in math, we have the origin of a number line or something, or of the 0 point. So we have, so this is 0 in all of our directions, basically. So this is a nice fixed point in this empty universe that we can use to set where our parts are. And then we have the 3 different planes coming through that. With the mouse, our left mouse button allows us to drag, and it will let us like highlight and select various things. We'll talk about why there's like, when you drag from one side or from the other side, you get different colors. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. The middle mouse button, if you click it and then move your mouse around, you're able to pan the screen, so you're able to move back and forth. And then the right mouse button, if you click it and move, this is how you're able to freely rotate the model around in space. Up here on the top right, we have the view cube, which lets us move around into various views on the model. So we can move to very specific, like we can be looking directly at the front face or whatever we need to by using the view cube. You can also do some rotations up here. And this little drop down has some other standard views and some other settings we can change, kind of detailing how we're looking at the model. Okay, so let's go ahead and start sketching. So I'm going to click this sketch button up at the top left. OnShape does a pretty good job of kind of telling you what each of the buttons do. So as you're learning, a lot of times if you're not really sure, you can just hover over something and it'll give you kind of its name first. And if you hover over longer, it gives you a whole list of how to use it, and kind of gives you a little help bubble basically. So especially as you're learning, you're getting new to things. If you're not really sure, you can just hover over stuff and it eventually kind of expands and tells you. It also shows you the keyboard shortcuts next to it. So if you don't want to move your mouse up here and click the sketch button, you can just click Shift S on your keyboard and you can create a new sketch that way too. Most of the time here, I'm going to try to use my mouse for everything and try to make it clear what I'm doing. If I start doing a bunch of keyboard shortcuts, it's really hard for people to follow along. So for now, we're going to go ahead and click Sketch. We have to tell it which plane or face that we're actually trying to sketch on. So we need to decide, are we looking at this, the sketch that we're going to do, are we going to do it from the top view, so we're looking like down at the part? We're going to do it from the front view, so we're looking just like right in front of it, or are we looking at the right view, or we're going to look at the side of the part? It doesn't really matter depending on which way we're doing it, but ideally, if you know there's going to be something you're creating that does have a top or a front or a right, you want to sketch it in the way that that's actually in the space, so that this direction up here is the actual top of your part, and the direction down here is the bottom of your part, and this is the front of your part. The better you can do it, the easier it is for other people to use your parts, especially when we're all kind of collaborating and going to use the parts to make a much bigger whole in like the actual robot. Okay, so for this case, we're going to go ahead and click on front. And so it lets me, it sees that front plane is selected up here, so it knows where we're sketching. And now it adds this like sketch one block box right here, so we can see where we're sketching again. Most of the time when we're sketching, we want to be looking what's called normal to our sketch, which is basically just looking straight at it. So instead of at this weird angle, like you can draw stuff on here, but all the lines are going to have like a kind of weird perspective, and it's not as easy. So we're just going to click on front on our little view cube, and it's going to bring us to this normal view, so we're looking directly perpendicular at the plane that we're sketching on. Now that we're in the sketch, our toolbar up here has changed all of its buttons. So now we're in a different context, because now we're inside editing this sketch, basically. This is what the sketch box right here means. And since we're editing the sketch, we now have different buttons up here that we can use to actually do all of our sketching. So these are going to be pretty similar to any drawing program you use, where you can draw lines and rectangles and circles or anything like that. So we're going to go ahead and make that rectangle that we saw in the slideshow earlier. So we have the rectangle tool. This is the corner rectangle tool. So this lets me click like the origin here, and I'm going to start at one corner of the rectangle, and I can drag out to however far I want. You can see that it does give you, it displays how big this rectangle is. So if I can bring it down, I can make it, pretty close to 2 inches, but you don't really worry about what the display is. Like sometimes it's a useful help to just kind of get started, but we're gonna actually accurately put in the numbers here in just a second to tell it how big it is. So I can go ahead and make that rectangle. If you see, like it brought up this white box. So this white box lets me input a dimension directly. So if I want to just start typing right now, I can tell it that this side of this box should be, or this rectangle should be 2 inches. I can just type 2 and enter. And now I have this dimension line forcing this box to be 2 inches. I'm gonna hit escape so I don't do it on that. I can type into here if I want, but I don't want to right now. I'll show you how to add back the 3 dimension in just a second. So I'm gonna hit escape to kind of finish the tool. So now I have this box. Since this is dimensioned at 2 inches, I can't click and drag this bar up at all. So I can't move this line of the rectangle at all, because this knows that this has to be 2 inches away from this line, and this line is forced to be at the origin because that's where I click to start it. So it's forced to stay at this point, and I can't move this anymore. Since I don't have a dimension down here at all, there's nothing stopping it. You can see that this line is blue, so that means this is what's called undefined. Since we haven't told it explicitly how far away this line is from here, I'm still able to move this. So I can click on this line, I can drag it back and forth wherever I want, since I haven't told it where I want it to be. So now if we want to tell it where we want it to be, we're going to come up to the top and we're going to use the dimension tool to specifically tell it that we want it to be 3 inches. So I can just click on the line. I can also click on the 2 edges. So if I click on this edge and then I also click on this edge, it'll kind of give me, it'll look the same dimension, but it's a little bit different because I am dimensioning these two widths apart instead of dimensioning that line. The outcome is going to be the same unless I ever were to go and delete that line or something like that. So just know that there's multiple ways to kind of get the same dimension, and as you get more and more advanced, sometimes those ways actually matter. Most of the time in this case, we could do it either way, and it's not going to change the final output of our part. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a 3. So we have that 2x3 rectangle. That was the same. That was the same size we had here. And this one, you can see the dimensions are on different parts of it. So these are on the top and the right. And in my drawing, we're on the left and the bottom. That doesn't matter as long as it's still dimensioning the same part. Once you're done with the dimension tool, you can click escape again to kind of get out of it. So right now I'm still dimensioning because I have this little crosshair and the dimension tool's in blue. If I hit escape, it lets me get back to my normal mouse cursor. So if we wanted the dimensions to be on the other side, I could just click and drag them, and I can move them around on the screen wherever I want. So now it looks the exact same as the thing we did before. But again, it doesn't actually change anything about the drawing. It just changes how it is presented to us. Okay, so now that we have the box the size we want, we can go ahead and say we're finished with the sketch. So we have the sketch 1, and we can click the green check. So that's done. And now we need to do the second step. Since we've done the sketch, we need to do step 2, which is add height. And we do that in OnShape with the extrude tool. So it's right next to the sketch button. So they're kind of laid out in somewhat of an order of what they think are important a little bit. Most of the time, the most important things are going to be pretty much towards the left of your toolbar as you're starting, the things that people are using the most often. So extrude is how we make something have depth. So we can go ahead and click extrude. There's a few different options up here that are pretty important. Solid versus surface, we'll almost never use surface. So if it ever shows up as surface, you're probably best to just click back to solid. Every once in a while, OnShape will think you want something to be a surface. You probably don't. There's a few times where maybe you do. Most of the time, you probably want a solid. Because solids are actual 3D things you can hold. Surfaces are just 2D, and they allow you to kind of do some special modeling and things. But most of the time, we're never going to have a surface on our robot since it's only a 2D. It doesn't have any thickness, basically. So it's not something we really want to use on our robot. Okay, so now we're in solid. Then we have these 4 other options down here. We have new, add, remove, and intersect. Right now, we're just going to look at new. So this basically creates a new part. So our parts right now are at 0 down here on the left. When we tell it to do new, it's going to add a new part for us. So it's going to be separate from any of the other parts we have created. We haven't created any other parts, so it's one of the reasons why we kind of need to do new. And then it tells us, okay, so what do we actually want to base this extrude off of? So when we have this faces, so we have to select the faces and sketch regions that we want. So we're going to go ahead and select the rectangle that we drew. It highlights kind of in orange, and then we can click it. I can use my right mouse button again to rotate, and we can start seeing that that gave it some depth. So that should look very similar to what we had here. And so that 1 inch is the default here is fine. So we can tell it if we want to extend it really far, you could make it like 100 inches or whatever, and it would just go really, really far. It'd be a really long bar. We only need 1 inch. Some other very useful things in OnShape, you don't have to ever worry about doing any of the math yourself. So you don't have to like type out, if you have to do some addition or subtraction or anything or division, you don't have to do it and then type the number in. Sometimes we get some kind of like small numbers, or we're trying to remove, so we're like taking a 16th off of something. Instead of like typing whatever it is, and having to do it offhand and then typing in like the decimal value into here, you can actually just do the equation right here. So I can do 1 inch minus 1 1/16 inches right here. And once I do that, I'm going to go back and edit it. It'll show up as the math done for me. But it's even nicer because when I click into it, SolidWorks or OnShape saves the equation for me, so you can still know like where that number came from and why it's that weird specific length or whatever you're doing, or I get at least an idea um, based on things. So this is a little convenient because not a lot of people have. Way too often when people are just learning, they're like they're typing it into Google or pulling out a calculator or something, and most of the time you don't need to. You can just type it right into the box. Okay, I'm gonna go back and make that 1 inch. We don't need to worry about these buttons. You won't use them too often. Um, Symmetric on occasion. So basically symmetric, instead of making it 3D and kind of pulling it directly out in a certain direction, symmetric will put it in the middle. So you can see it's like in the middle of the plane. You can also flip the direction around. So right now we're extruding it out towards us. Maybe for some reason we need to go the opposite direction. So this little arrow key is how you flip things the opposite direction. So you can do that, and now it's going to be kind of pushed back away from us. For something like this, if we're only making this one shape, it probably doesn't matter. We could do it either way. But once if we're starting to add multiple parts on top of it, or if this is part of another part, it's really important to know which direction something is going. Okay, so we have our rectangle. We can draw that, and now we have the feature trees changed a little bit. So this sketch exists, but it's faded. It's kind of grayed out. So that means it's not visible right now. So because we have this feature that's using this sketch, OnShape defaults to not showing the sketch anymore, because this feature does what's called consuming the sketch. So it kind of used the sketch. So now OnShape thinks you're done with it. But if for some reason you're not, maybe you had multiple things sketched out, maybe you want to do multiple features on it, you can just click on this like slash through eyeball, and it'll show the sketch again. So now it's a little hard to see, but we have those gray lines there compared to what we had before, which were just black lines, and it's not like you have the little like grayed out part because it is the sketch. And then we have this extrude. So this is the feature we already had that made this 3D. But now we also have this part. So we haven't changed the name or anything, so this just says part 1. We can right click on it and we can rename, so we can make it whatever name we want. So a lot of times this is really important on the robot. We try to give everything a very reasonable name that we can understand. So if it's the rear left support rod or something, we kind of know what it is, so we can find it in the big list. There might be dozens of parts in any one part studio. It's easier if we can have a good name that we can all understand what it actually is. So as we're CADing together, we can find the right parts and things. Okay, so we have this new part. We've done our sketch and extrude. The next step is to add more sketches. So we're going to sketch this circle right here in the middle. So we're going to sketch again the same way. We're just going to click that sketch button up in the top left. We're going to click on the same, we're going to click on the actual face of the block now. So before we clicked on this front plane, and we could still do that because that's where we can sketch. But if we want, we can hide these planes. So just like we hid that sketch, we can go through and click the eyeball and all of those, and they'll be hidden. And then we can show them again by unclicking those if we ever need them again. So this sketch is asking for where to actually do the sketch. We can click on any of the faces of the rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and click on this front face, and that'll be where we're sketching just like before. We now have this sketch blocks. We know we're in this like sketch mode because we have all of our sketch tools again instead of the feature tools we had before when we weren't in a sketch. So I'm going to go back to the view cube and click front so we can get that front view again. Sometimes it'll zoom in a little too far. Like that's way too close to actually sketch. So if you just use the scroll wheel, you can zoom in and out. And we're going to draw a circle, right? So the goal here is to have a circle right in the middle of this face that's 1 inch in diameter. So we can click on the circle tool. And there's a few ways to force it to be exactly in the middle. So I could just draw this circle anywhere. I can click escape to get out of the circle drawing, and then I can move it around and I could try to put it in the center. I could dimension it into the center. So with our dimension tool like we had before, just like we were able to set just like we had before, the circles, we're able to dimension it based on different points. So we can go here to here, and we can tell it how far apart these are. So that's one way. And yeah, like I said earlier, SolidWorks or Inventor, Creo, there's a whole lot of 3D modeling programs. Most of them, the basics are going to be all very, very similar. You're still going to sketch, you're still going to extrude, you're still going to set your dimensions. All of those are going to be pretty close to identical across most of the 3D modeling programs you can come to. They definitely have their differences. There's learning curves for each of them, but almost all of them have a way to draw a rectangle and then give it some height with an extrude function or something close, or something like extrude if it may be called something a little bit different. Okay, so instead of using the dimension tool, because then we'd have to like know how much half is. So if we wanted to put this directly in the center, we'd have to remember that this was 3 inches wide. We'd have to do the division in our head and make it 1.5, which when we're using numbers in this example, it's pretty easy. Most people can do 3 divided by 2 pretty quickly in their head and get it right. The problem is as we get more complicated robots and things, a lot of times they're not nice round numbers. It might be some weird 2.8725 or something, some strange number. Doing that division is a lot harder. And a lot of times in a sketch, we might go back and change something. So in general, as we're making things, the fewer times we can actually type in a number and set a specific value, the better. We really want to define our parts based on their relation to other parts of what we've already made. So if we're trying to put this in the center of this rectangle, instead of telling it to be 1.5 over and 1 down, we can tell it directly to be in the center. So there's a few different ways to do that. One of my favorites, which is really fast, if I just click on this center hole, or on the center point of the circle, I can drag it over to the line. It'll kind of snap to the line, and then it can snap to the center here. So it'd be right on the midpoint of this line. That's not where we want it, though. So then I drag over, you can see I get this dotted line, and now it tells me anywhere that I put it here, it's going to be horizontal to this dashed line. So I know for sure that it's going to be in the center of this vertical space across the rectangle anywhere I put it on here. But I don't want it just vertical there. I also want it vertical in the other direction as well. So I'm going to come up to this line. I'm going to drag it along. I'm going to get to the center box again. And now I'm going to drag down, get one dash line. I'm going to drag down, get my second dash line. And when I release, it now like kind of adds these points right here. And it forces this now to be in the middle. So I can't drag this anymore because I fully defined it to be in the circle of my I've fully defined it to be in the circle or in the center of my rectangle. So that's super quick. I don't have to do any special buttons or anything to do it that way. If for some reason the clicking dragging isn't working, or you want something that's kind of more definitive, so you can just hit it. I'm going to Control Z real fast and undo. Or actually, I can come up here and undo. So we can see the full, so I can see exactly what my undo was. If I right click, I can see all my past undos. I can go back multiple steps if I want. So I moved it, I undid, so now I can drag this around again. So if I want to force that same type of relation between those points, instead of doing it and clicking and dragging, which like I said, I still do a lot, it's really fast. I can also click the center circle. I can click the center of this line over here, And then this drop down right here has all of what we call our sketch relations. So this is how we can tell it how something is related to another line, another part of the sketch, anything like that. So some of these you'll recognize from geometry. You have perpendicular and vertical and horizontal. Those are all pretty easy. Parallel, that type of thing. Some of them may be a little bit new, but they're not too complicated. You'll start figuring them out as you use them. But for this one, so we have 2 points here, and we want those 2 points to be horizontal to each other because I want like a straight line to be able to cross all the way through them. So I can just click the horizontal button. You can also see that it has the keyboard shortcut for me next to it. So it's also just H. So a lot of times that's even faster. So if I don't want to do any clicking and dragging, I can click on those 2 points, click H on my keyboard, and I get a horizontal relation really quickly. I'm going to do the same thing to that center point and the center point of this vertical line. And I can come up here and I can do vertical, or I can put V on my keyboard. And now I've accomplished the exact same thing as what I did with the dragging, except done a different way. So it's definitely one of the important takeaways from today is there's a lot of different ways to do the exact same thing in OnShape. Like you'll get the same part, but some of them are faster than others. Some of them are more intuitive. So just finding kind of the ways you like to do it, and then learning from each other to find faster ways. And as you get more experience, you get faster and faster at creating parts. Okay, so we have this point in the center. So now we know I can't drag it around anywhere. I do still need to come up and dimension one thing, which is the actual center, because that's something that we need to fully define, right? It's not related to anything else. We're telling it, no matter kind of what size this rectangle is, I want this circle to be 1 inch. And so in this case, we do need to type it in then. So I'm going to go ahead and click the dimension tool. I can just type the 1, hit enter, and now I've defined it as a 1 inch diameter. You get that little diameters logo there, which is just the circle with the slash all the way through it. Instead of what you could define a circle as is radius, but we didn't use radius here, we used diameter. So it gives us a diameter circle or symbol. Okay, so after we have this next sketch, what's our next step? Our next step is to add or remove material. So that means we're adding another feature because we have a sketch now. One of the nice things OnShape does, you do have a little bit of a shortcut. So if you're inside of a sketch and all you want to do is do an extrude, this extrude button is left here for you. So it removes a lot of the other potential 3D features you can use when you're not in a sketch, but it leaves extrude. And this helps you be a little bit faster because when you click it, extrude here, it's going to assume you want to extrude the thing you just sketched. So it's a little bit quicker, so I can go ahead and hit extrude. And so now I have to start looking at my options. So it defaulted and kind of like guessed for me that I want to do one thing, but that's not actually what we want, right? So it defaulted as we just wanted to add some material to the face of that block to give us that little peg. Another option, instead of add, we could do new. So maybe this is a separate part. So maybe we just want to make a cylinder now that's going to be a completely different part than the one we made before. And if we were doing that, we would do new. We would get it says part 2 down here. We could rename it afterwards. And you notice it changes color too. So the 2 parts are different colors. We have this gray and this blue. So that tells us we're making a new part when the colors are different. Add was what it defaulted to. Like I said, adding just adds material to the part that already exists. But instead of either of those, what we want to do, because to follow kind of our example, is to use remove. So when we go to remove, it starts showing us what it looks like if we took a hole all the way or through the part some dimension. Just like we had with the extrude, we can tell it how far to go. So instead of here, it's 1 inch, which is basically all the way through, but we can actually tell it to only go maybe ½ an inch. So you can just type 1/2. And so now it's not coming in through the back, and it's only coming in halfway through, so it only moves like half the distance. Sometimes you don't necessarily know how far all the way is. Again, like 1 inch is really easy, but maybe you want it to go all the way through the part, but you don't know exactly how long the part is. You can change this blind. So blind just means whatever distance you type here, that's what it does. It doesn't know anything about the part geometry, and so that's what it means by blind. It's not actually like looking at anything else for a reference. You can change it to a couple other things. You can do up to next. We use up to next a lot, especially when we're putting any cutouts or anything in something. If we use up to next, it'll push it all the way through the part. And even if I go back in and I change this distance, so maybe I go and edit this extrude, instead of 1 inch, I make this 2 inches deep, it'll always keep that hole going all the way through the part. So this is just another way that we don't necessarily have to type in a specific number, because things might change as we're modeling. So anywhere we can reference and say, yeah, I just want this to go all the way through, you can do up to next. You can also go all the way to through all, which in this case, they'll do exactly the same thing. So up to next is going to go up to this next face. Through all is also going to go up to this next face because there's nothing else there. But there's sometimes if you have something behind it, maybe you're trying to do like one side, maybe you're putting a hole in like one side of a tube or something that has a hollow center. Up to next will do something different than through all, and we'll look at that in the future as well. And you'll get that as you go through some of the tutorials as well. So in this case, up to next is great. This is one of the ones that I use the most when I'm just removing things. You just switch this to up to next. You don't have to type anything. It just kind of works. So we can go ahead and hit the check mark. So it didn't generate a new part, right? Because we just removed material from the part we already had. But our feature tree now has sketch 1, extrude 1, sketch 2, extrude 2. As we're going, especially if we're going to have something that's going to be used by a lot of people, or it's going to be around for a long time, it's really useful to label some of these things. So if you right click, you can rename any of these. So we can do main box sketch or something like that. We can rename this one to center hole sketch. We can rename the features if we want. Center hole cutout, center hole remove, anything like that. So now if we come back to this in several weeks, I know where to edit. I know to edit this sketch to be able to get this circle if I want to change this dimension for some reason. Maybe I want to come in, I can do edit, and instead of 1 inch, maybe I want to make the same part, except I need a slightly smaller hole. Maybe I need a 1/2 inch hole here. I can do that really fast, and now it just updates, and I knew exactly where to edit that. And to kind of show you the through all, if I edit it here, I can make this wider or deeper, and it still has this hole going all the way through it, where if I had just sort of done the default where I left it as blind and 1 inch, it wouldn't have cut all the way through. Okay, so how do we change the toolbar? So yeah, the toolbar only changes when we are making sketches. So if I'm editing the sketch, it will also change. So if I right click in here and I click edit, I'm now in a sketch again because I have this box up here, and this kind of tells me I'm in a sketch. Then the toolbar is also changed for it to be the sketch toolbar again. So I can go back and change it back to what we had before. I can also just undo back to whatever we had before. Again, you can undo quite a ways, which is super useful. So it's okay to kind of experiment and play around because you can always just back up to wherever you were in the past. So nothing that you do is really permanent in here, which is very, very nice. Okay, so yeah, let's see. So that's most of what we looked at already. Kind of walk through some of the basic navigation while we're here. Left mouse click, exit a menu. Yeah, escape like we were doing the entire time. Escape is super useful to just get out of any menu or any like option if you're not really sure what's happening. There's like boxes. Sometimes you click on something by mistake. Clicking escape a few times kind of gets you back to the main screen. Zooms on the scroll wheel. Rotate is the right click. Clicking in the middle button is the pan. Kind of walk through most of this already. Add dimensions. Yeah, so there's a few other sketch tools we didn't really look at. We can look at real fast. So if we come up to sketch, we can sketch across like the top of this block, and I can click on top to get me directly on it. The other way, if you have like, maybe you don't have something, maybe you have some like angled plane or something and you still want to get directly to the sketch. If you if I right click and do view normal to, it'll just bring me straight to this view as well. There's normally one, is it in there? No. Yeah, it is. So if you click on this little arrow, there's a normal view. No, that's a named view. That's separate. Yes, I think you do have to right click. View normal too. There's some shortcuts for it as well, and keyboard shortcuts, but we'll get to those in the future. Okay, so there's a few other sketch tools, so we can draw like different arcs. Oh, I didn't talk about the other options. So the way we drew the rectangle was just a corner rectangle. So I drew the bottom left corner and I drew up to the top right corner. You can also draw rectangles in other ways. And so if you want to do that, you have this little drop down arrow here, and it has the center point rectangle. So now I can draw a rectangle directly from the center if I want. So that helps sometimes if you want to put the center of the rectangle directly on a point, you can just draw it that way from the beginning. Selection boxes real fast since I just did it. So if you click with your mouse button and you click and drag, you get this little like square lasso, and it allows you to select anything that's inside of it. So you could go in and you could just like individually click on every item, but that's kind of slow. So instead, you can just click into white space. You can also click the space bar to unselect things. So if I have these two lines selected, I can just click space bar and it'll unselect all of my things for me. You can also just lasso them. So if I click across and drag, I can select everything that way. If I select just this part, I select just that line with the lasso. If I go back the other way, so instead of clicking and dragging from left to right, if I click from right to left, anything I select, as long as I select a part of it, it'll select that line. So since I'm intersecting these two lines, the top and the right one, it'll select both of those if I have the orange box drawn. But if I have the blue box, it won't select either of them because I didn't select the entire thing. So orange box is partial. If anything that intersects it at all, it's going to select it. Blue box is the entire thing, so only things that are fully inside of the blue box get selected. So it's very useful sometimes if you need to manipulate things, if you want to edit some things. It's very handy. So here I can just select all of it. I can click delete and get rid of that rectangle because we don't need it. There's some other ways to draw circles. You can draw ellipses. So some of the tools are kind of hidden in these drop-down menus. There's a few different ways to draw some arcs. The polygon tool is super useful. We can draw multi-sided objects. So I can click in here anywhere. And then I have this little option to change the number of sides. You can draw a 33-sided figure, or you can draw a triangle. And I'm just kind of moving my mouse up and down to set the number of sides here that I actually want. So we can get a hexagon, an octagon, whatever we're trying to draw. And then you can go back in later and change the number of sides too if we want. You can get a 12-sided figure, kind of whatever we're trying to do. We can draw it pretty fast. There's some curves, points, that sort of thing. We can draw text, so for some things it may make sense to type out some kind of text. We can set a few different fonts, and it'll give us the nice text laid out. Oh, okay, mostly drawing corner, yeah. Right where we need it to be. We can change the size of this box. I think if we change like the dimensions for it, we can reset some of these things. It's like 2, yeah, so it'll make it all smaller. And so that's handy in some of like our 3D printing or something. If you want to put a label on something, you could put some text there for it. Okay. I think that was most of what I had planned. Sketch relations, we talked about those already. Okay. I'm not going to take up too much more of the time tonight because I think the best way to really learn how to do this, now that we have a little bit of idea, kind of the basics of how to make a part in SolidWorks, or in OnShape, excuse me, I'm so used to, we did that for decades, so now we're teaching a new tool, so I get them mixed up sometimes, and I slip. So OnShape has really, really great learning pathways built in that you can basically follow along with. You can pause, rewind, they have the exact kind of assignments for everything. So if you click through, the first two are going to be pretty fast because they're largely a lot of what we talked about today, but they'll add some more detail. So you can run through these really quick to kind of get a review. And then we get into sketching and part design pretty quickly. So if by the time we get into the 3D printing training, which isn't this weekend but next weekend, um, if we want to get to kind of be up to date and kind of ready to be able to kind of make some of your own things with the 3D printer, ideally you go through these 4 lessons here. These are all on OnShape for things. OnShape for FRC.com has them all listed. So if you do start learning and scroll all the way down to the bottom, it has these 4. It has all 9 of these ready to go. But if we do these 4 in the next week and a half or so, however it is till next Thursday, a little more than that maybe. So those 4, and then the rest are definitely useful too. We definitely want to get all the way through number 6, which is OnShape assemblies. This will kind of help you make any of the things that we'll make. We'll have some projects, we'll have some CAD things, then we'll create them in the lab too. 7, we use a little bit of drawings, and it's definitely useful to go through. 8's going to be really important when we start doing much bigger projects. So if you want to start actually working on the robots, or when we're working on projects with other people, this 8, we're doing document management, and we're talking about how we interact with multiple documents and how we can name things and version things. So that's really, really useful going forward. And then 9's helpful for some of the import and export, and we'll go through a little bit of 9 when we talk about the 3D printer, because we have to figure out how to get our part files out of OnShape so that we can actually export them, so that we can print them, because we can't just print directly from OnShape. Okay.